Hi and welcome. If you're just joining us, we're giving everyone a moment to log on, and we're going to get started with a conversation today in just a minute or so. Hello and welcome to another MassMEDIC webinar. I am Nicole Owens, and if you're not familiar with MassMEDIC, we are a membership-based trade association that works to bolster the ecosystem in New England through advocacy, education, events like this, connection, and awareness. Today, I am pleased to welcome you to a webinar hosted by Triple Ring. It's Diagnostics in the Future, and we're going to have a great conversation today about merging in vitro diagnostics with medical devices. Quick housekeeping note, we will have time allocated at the end of the conversation today for questions. So please feel free to feed those in anytime during the conversation in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Now I am pleased to introduce our moderator for today's conversation, Ryan McGinnis. Ryan is the Global Head of In Vitro Technologies and the GM for the department at Triple Ring. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Nicole. Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this exciting MassMEDIC town hall conversation. I am Ryan McGinnis. I'm a general manager at Triple Ring Technologies. And at Triple Ring, we stand side by side with innovators to solve hard problems, launch breakthrough products, and to start companies. We are a large team of doers. We're engineers and scientists who build complex systems for clients. So if you need help designing and building systems for med tech, life sciences, and healthcare applications, please send me a note. And as Nicole mentioned, we are going to save some time at the end of the discussion to answer questions. And so as these questions come to mind, please do put them into the Q&A pane, and we'll handle it from there. So on to our panel discussion. It's an honor to join our experts today. We have a group of professionals who in their own ways are focused on improving healthcare and the ways we deliver it. And as many of us know, solving problems in modern healthcare requires a diversity of approaches. And this group represents three efforts to understand patient and market needs, to address those needs, and to efficiently bring solutions to those who need it most. I'll now ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and we're going to start with you, Fonta, please.
Thank you. So my name is Fonta Sharif. My background is in public health, specifically epidemiology and biostatistics. Currently, I am a research consultant at Advisory Board. So for those of you that are unfamiliar, Advisory Board is a 40-year-old syndicated and insights firm that is seated under the Optum and United Health Group umbrella. We serve over 4,000 clients across the healthcare system, between health plans, life sciences, digital health sectors, et cetera. So we really aim to provide our clients with strategic and operational guidance to really tackle the most challenging problems in healthcare, whether that's by making progress to value-based care, to use of medical evidence, et cetera. So we really aim to help executives in the healthcare industry essentially work smarter by providing actionable strategies and practical tools to support implementation. We then share our research findings with our members through reports on our website, through emailed newsletters, through our podcast, and we also have virtual and live events. My specific team right now focuses on ways in which life sciences organizations can support ecosystem progress, and that's usually through partnership and just generally having a deeper understanding of what other sectors need. So this year, we're really focused on how just medical products, clinical decision-making, and purchasing will really evolve over the next decade. My specific projects really revolve around disruptive therapeutics and diagnostics, such as ultra-high cost drugs, digital therapeutics, psychedelic-assisted therapy, biomarker testing, and more. Prior to joining the life sciences team, I also worked on the cardiovascular roundtable, where I championed topics such as telecardiology strategy, virtual cardiac rehab, artificial intelligence in cardiovascular care, and healthcare equity measurement. Our end goal and mission at Advisory Board essentially is improved care, and we always aim to do that by providing best practice research and doing market analyses. Prior to Advisory Board, I was at the Massachusetts Department of Public Health for several years, and I worked there as a tuberculosis epidemiologist, and also worked there while I completed my MPH from Boston University. Prior to DPH, I also spent a year or so at Boston Medical Center doing research on autism diagnostic tools. So because of these experiences, I would consider myself having a well-rounded understanding of the clinical, the business, and also sometimes the political side of healthcare. I personally am very passionate about healthcare and the intersection of technology, as well as just infectious disease surveillance and management. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me. Thank you for having me. I'm super happy to be here.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Very impressive. Jean, could you go next, please?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I am Jean Olive. I am the Chief Technology Officer at Best Buy Health, which is part of Best Buy. And I can tell you a little bit about later why Best Buy is in health. My background is really focused in technology. I've always been in technology, and I'm an engineer by trade. I spent more than 20 years in aerospace and defense, working on some really neat high-tech defense systems and missile design and development programs, and then went into health, went over to Philips, and ended up being the Philips Healthcare CIO. And I really loved being in health. I really believe in working for a company with a purpose. After 5 years there, I went to Schneider Electric and was leading their major business transformation across the company. But it was energy management. It was a great company. There was a lot to do. However, I just felt like it wasn't my fit. So my dad had congestive heart disease. In the last 6 months of his life were really rough. He was very positive, wanted to live. We could see the decline, but he felt like he was going to keep going forever. And during the whole time, he ended up with 3 hospitalizations. And I never felt that they were hospitalizations that were really necessary. I kept feeling like we need technology to help him. He can be managing and monitoring in the home. We have remote patient monitoring systems, and they just weren't there. And this was during COVID. So 2 of his hospitalizations, my mother couldn't even go see him. Can you imagine being 60 years married and you have to drop your husband off at the ER and walk away from him after you've been caring for him, most of his life? So the day that after my dad died, we were at his funeral. He was a veteran, and I got a text from Deborah DeSanzo, who I'd worked with in the past, said, are you looking for any new opportunities? Give me a call. And I felt like it was time. It was awesome to be able to go back in health. And what we're doing at Best Buy Health and the mission of our company, the mission of Best Buy is the purpose is to enrich lives through technology. Now, Best Buy Health kicks it up a notch, right? And we are going to enrich and save lives through technology and meaningful connections. So we have care centers, we have command control centers, and we have Geek Squad that can help the serviceability. So that the merging of all the great things within Best Buy, I feel is really going to help us achieve our big goal is to enable care at home for everyone. And that everyone is really important, like what Fonta is saying, right? It's health equity, right? We really believe that bringing care into the home will not only help with health equity, it will help with our physicians and our practitioners. It's really the whole ecosystem. We're right at that tipping point, but if we can get there and provide the right service to our customers, I really believe we'll be ahead of the game, and it'll be a great thing for everyone. So that's kind of a little bit of my background and my why.
Thanks very much. And John, go ahead, please let us know who you are and what you're up to.
I'm John Martin. I'm the Chief Medical Officer of Butterfly Network. I'm a vascular surgeon by trade, and as you can tell very quickly, a pet owner of many. Our company, Butterfly Network, has developed the world's first single probe whole body ultrasound system. We put ultrasound on a silicon chip. And what that does, it really shatters that ceiling of ultrasound being a limited resource and makes it available essentially for everyone, everywhere, to be used for every situation. Much like Jean Marie's situation, some of the work that we're doing is actually transforming care into the home. You think about telemedicine and what we've done historically, it's a teleconversation. When you bring imaging into the situation, it becomes a completely different conversation. Because when you look at when there is a diagnostic dilemma, 3/4 of the time, it's simple imaging that answers those questions. And so we want to put those imaging answers in the hands of physicians, nurses, nurse practitioners in every care venue. Butterfly was introduced in 2018 with an innovative device. We've added on top of it award-winning software that really simplifies the use of the device. So your focus is on actually the information that's provided, not figuring out how to actually use it. We've coupled with that a workflow that can integrate into health systems. So it becomes a complete solution for the use of imaging and really transform the way it's used. If you think about the way medicine is practiced, and all of you have been involved in some way, you do a history, you do a physical, and then you pause. And sometimes you're sent for tests. Sometimes they make a guess and start treatment. Well, what happens now with Butterfly, it's history, physical, image. You have much better decision-making. You can start definitive treatment much sooner. And it really is a much more efficient way to practice medicine. And so that's what Butterfly is focused on. I have a background as a practicing physician. I was the president of the largest cardiology group in metropolitan Washington, and also was the vice president of physician operations. I'm the president of a nonprofit that's been doing free cardiovascular screening around the globe for people. So I'm as passionate as my co-moderators and presenters here about healthcare. And I will confess that I'm Butterfly patient number 1. I found my own cancer with this device and have living proof of now what I like to say, both sides of the knife of what it's like to experience healthcare. And I'm very happy to join this panel because this very important discussion.
Wow. All right. Thanks, John. Yeah. And even just from the backgrounds of this group, it's amazing how the healthcare system touches us all. And we've been professionals in it for our whole careers, but it's eventually we are also users of it. And around my family, personally, we know we have to manage our own health more than we might like to. And so these are problems that we're all working hard to solve. So I would like to jump in with some questions and discussions. And the first question is going to go to you, Fonta. Your view of this world is, tends to be on the high level, 30,000 foot trends in policy, markets, technology approaches, all these, combined efforts. What do the data tell us about the trends in healthcare access and deployment?
Sure, I'm happy to start. So of course, we know that a lot of healthcare is moving into the home. So as a firm, we always get the question, like, will we transition to a world in which just brick and mortar lab sites are just no longer necessary? Will all of healthcare be done from the home? And I think just the truth is that patients really want convenience that they have experienced through like telehealth and online grocery shopping amid the pandemic to really just extend to other areas of their lives, even lab testing and healthcare. And it's really clear that consumer preferences are changing and that convenience really tops this list. So just based off of our research, we've just identified that there are just several trends that have really aided in accelerating at-home care adoption. So first, there's just a lot of advancements in home testing technology. So some of the ones that we're seeing really like limit the potential for error, especially if patients are collecting their own samples. And then on top of that, lab vendors are also just exploring different technologies such as like biometric patch sensors in lieu of at-home blood draws. We're also moving forward to where we can see research that will really need to be evaluated for safety and just quality, because these technologies are really working to inform practice and policy. Secondly, we're also seeing that there's a lot more provider involvement in home testing. So we're seeing that technology and patient preferences are really shifting, and this has motivated health systems to sort of create this new environment where home testing is a huge business, and it really just lends credibility to home options. And then on top of that, at-home diagnostics can honestly help tremendously with hospital capacity, as we've seen through the pandemic, and really just work to alleviate provider burnout. and also just being able to allow clinical staff to work more top of license. Third, we're seeing that there's just increased affordability and accessibility of light lab tests. So these can easily be administered at home, sometimes paid for out of pocket. They can also serve as an addition rather than a substitution to regular testing. And then lastly, as we know, there's been a huge shift to just a general awareness of public health and one's health in general. So more people today are accessing more healthcare than ever before. And it's really just because of a heightened sense of awareness of one's health. So moving healthcare into the home really holds many public health benefits, especially for things like infectious disease, like COVID-19 and very common chronic illnesses, where people may have difficulty accessing traditional care. And then also just self-testing at home can really just substantially reduce or eliminate the risk of people spreading viruses, as well as it just being more convenient than traditional diagnostics. But however, we're seeing that although there is very widespread interest in using technology to really monitor patients at home and through these programs, there really is just no consensus on the best way to do this. We're not sure. Different members tell us different things, but ultimately all programs really work very differently than each other. And success really depends on several factors, such as patients' level of acuity, how sick they are, what their health literacy is like, what their tech literacy is like, their at-home environments, what their families are going through, and then also ultimately how clinicians interact with patients to retrieve their data.
Yeah, nice. And Jean, I'm sure that much of this resonates with you. And can you talk a bit about how this, the information that groups like Fonta are gathering has guided this strategy and that you've developed with Best Buy Health?
Yeah, I mean, she's saying exactly what we're seeing. There is so much variability within the usage and the adoption and the systems. But I think what we really know is that technology is in the home, and that's, Best Buy has had technology in the home for a long time, but also now health is in the home. So how do we connect the two and work to solve the barriers of having technology and health in the home? Primarily the one is serviceability, right? I mean, people are tech savvy, but oftentimes when it's an active aging community, or if it's community people who are not feeling well, who are chronically ill or have issues, it's harder to use it. And the biggest problem that we're finding out there across the board is the serviceability, the installs, making the connections if something goes wrong, and then the equipment. And that's where we're leveraging our Geek Squad in that point of care to have that human connection. I mean, you need to have the human connection. And then the adoption will come, and then really to benefit what we're finding with our command control centers, where we have our nursing on staff, and everything comes into the platform and is monitored, that we are actually being more proactive. We're being ahead of an incident and very less reactive. And the nurses actually have more time. The patients, the people at home really like it because it's a personal care. They get it, every day, or anytime that something goes wrong, they can be right there and connecting. And the quality of care far exceeds the quality of care from what we're hearing from our patients, and the results of these studies that we're doing exceeds what you get in the hospital. So I think overall, those are the big things, right? The adoptions, and where we're trying with our strategy to pivot is to get it that the consumers want this, right? And so in many of our studies, we did a big one with UMass Medical and Hospital at Home. And one of the first patients to do hospital at home, which is a little different than just managing care at home, like with chronic care, but hospital at home, you do have the nurses coming in. It's much more managed. Was that he was an older gentleman who had COVID, but his son was a physician, right? So his son was the one that kicked it over, like, Dad, this is a good thing, right? Not everybody has that. So it's a huge change. But what we're finding too is that, what care at home, you move more, you eat better, and you sleep better. And those are three factors that patients need to get better, faster. And I also think from a caregiver's perspective, and that's kind of like I feel like the caregivers are really the unsung heroes in all this. And I think about my mom, everything she went through with my dad in the last 6 months. But by the time she passed, she was so exhausted. I didn't really see it till we were looking at pictures after and getting everything ready for the funeral, but she was so exhausted. And, having really good care at home and that ease of mind and knowing that, if your weight goes up, then, it could be salt levels, it could be excess water and everything that having someone that tells you what's going on versus trying to guess it or trying to wait till I get there 2 days later and say, there's a problem. I think we better get dad to the hospital. So I think that's aligning with our strategies, going back to leveraging technology and meaningful connections. You can't do one without the other. You've got to have the tech, but you've got to have that human factor. And how you deliver that human factor will be the differentiator, in my opinion.
Yeah, thanks. And John, this is a good spot for you to jump in and using Butterfly's platform as an example. How is technology being used to address these large market trends and these unmet needs effectively?
Well, when I think about shifting to the home, I kind of have in my mind 4 Ps. First of all, what problem are we actually trying to solve? What clinical healthcare problem are we actually trying to address in the home? The second thing is people. What are the patients, if you will, that need that problem solved, and what are their characteristics, and what are the people that are actually available to assist in that, whether it's on-site or remotely? The third thing is what products are actually available and can be used in that environment effectively to actually manage the situation. And then the final thing, what processes are in place to actually execute on that? And so the reason I see so much variability across the globe is because you don't see consistency in all 4 of those. That's a lot of variables that come into play. And to be really good at all of those is a big challenge. And I think where Butterfly is stepping in is we know how important a role imaging can actually play in the management. And let's use Jean Marie's situation because it's so near and dear to her, congestive heart failure. Congestive heart failure is a volume problem. And people end up coming back into the hospital consistently because they become volume overloaded, or you get over-diuresed and you're dehydrated. Now, you can assess that historically. You go to the emergency room, they get a chest x-ray and they draw blood work. But what's been known for quite some time is you can actually manage this with using lung ultrasound imaging. It is actually incredibly effective at looking at volume overload. And there are a number of clinical studies that demonstrate that, in fact, it can reduce the amount of admissions to the hospital, and you can keep people out of the emergency department and know when to discharge them from the hospital if you use lung ultrasound. So we know it's an effective tool that gets to the product. Now the people, well, who can do that? Well, interestingly enough, people going into the home can learn it very quickly, healthcare professionals, because it's one of the easiest things to learn. The Butterfly device is only $2,000, so it's actually affordable. And there's a nice connectivity into the health system so you can manage it. So that process is doable. And if you want to take it one step further, and that is we've done clinical studies where patients have been able to scan themselves to manage that information. So now not only can they take their own temperature, can they get their own blood pressure, can they measure their own glucose, but there is a future where they can measure their own volume, which will keep Jean Marie's dad in the home because they can manage that heart failure there and not go to the emergency room. Now, those clinical studies are under an IRB at this point. We're working through getting through the FDA, but that is something, this topic is about future. The future is actually a lot closer than one might see. And it's the role of technology to manage these specific problems in the home that's going to change the game for so many of these patients. And not to mention the fact that it reduces the cost of care because those admissions are so incredibly expensive and burdening our healthcare system. We only want people in the hospital that need that advanced level of care. If we can manage it outside the hospital, in the home, as everyone says, I'd rather sleep in my own bed, eat my own food, and I can be very reliable that I'm taking my own medications in that place. It is the safest place to be if you aren't critically ill.
Sorry, and yeah, thanks. It's very interesting. So, in vitro diagnostics have led the way historically, I would say, to widely distributed medical technology, short of maybe eyeglasses, and being, easy enough to get into the point of care and into the home. And this was only accelerated through COVID and the pandemic, right? So maybe, John, if we stick with you for just a bit, more complex devices following on that path to direct-to-consumer type stuff. and even perhaps get a bit technical around, what the considerations were or had to be made to address patient and end user needs in unskilled settings or at home. And just, you think about the arc of where diagnostics has come from over the last 30 years or so. There's a group, their North American unit is in Maine. It's Global Access Diagnostics. This is used to be Mologic. And they were the first ones with the at-home pregnancy test kit. And so that's was incredibly successful. That form factor is very successful. We all use it for all different types of diagnosis. How do we get these more complex devices, or how do we build these complex devices to be that accessible and that easy to use?
Yeah, and I think it circles around, again, narrow the scope of what problem you're trying to address. I think that's critically important. You have to look at the cost effectiveness of the device itself. Is it actually, do you get the bang for the buck that's there, so that healthcare systems and the payers can actually afford to do it and it makes sense? And then you have to really leverage kind of the simple user interfaces, so that people that aren't sophisticated in the use of even their smartphone, as an example, can actually utilize these devices. And we've come a long way. I think one of the best examples that I use as an example for Butterfly, because when we mention patients are doing their own ultrasound, you kind of get this, oh my gosh, people train for years to do ultrasound. I remind them that we have defibrillators now in airports, gyms, everywhere. And that's a device that delivers electrical charge that if it hits the wrong cycle, actually kills you, doesn't save you. And yet, very easy consumers can follow the directions. The intelligence built into the device is such that it's remarkably safe. We use that same kind of thought process, using artificial intelligence tools to make it simpler to use these devices, to become safer, and to actually return on the investment of, if it's going to be available, it's going to be as good as that device was in the hospital. And I think the combination of the affordability and the usability and the versatility of these devices will make that technology possible. If you step back and think of 20 years ago, that patients are going to be doing their own glucose, measuring their own blood pressure, monitoring their own heartbeat, if you will, in the home, everybody would have said we're all crazy, but we're not anymore. And so I think the whole purpose of this and this conversation is what's actually possible, because patients are capable of doing remarkable things if the technology is made right and made affordable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe Fonta and Jean, if you could, I see you shaking your heads. If you have thoughts along these lines as well, please pitch in.
Yeah. So as John said, affordability is definitely like a huge thing. So like, is it affordable to those people who are most at risk for severe disease? Are there cost and payment models in place? Also just like the sensitivity of these devices. So like a major concern for patients and also health systems and pharma is reliability of some of these newer devices, which in turn could also just lead to like overutilization, especially if the results aren't reliable or the management systems aren't reliable. Patients are always going to have to come back to the hospital, and that again will just defeat the purpose. And then also, as John said, usability for sure. Like, how user-friendly is it? How much training or education will be required of patients who are using these products at home? Is it something that's easily portable? Does it involve equipment? Things of that sort. And then also, I feel like a lot of patients really are very concerned about like privacy and confidentiality nowadays, and like how data is stored, what protocols are in place, what consent looks like, etc.
Jean, any other thoughts from your perspective?
No, I think leveraging what everybody says, right? It's got to be easy to use. It's got to be safe and secure. Bringing back to the data aspects, right? And we've got to be able to leverage, leverage AI, machine learning to help be more diagnosis. But I think it's there, and I love John's example on a defibrillator, because I don't think people bought into one until lives were saved on a plane, right? Like once they saw it and they believed it, then they'll pull it in. And I think that's where we are with the tipping point, because the results, especially the work we've done with our recent acquisition, Current Health, the results are there and they're phenomenal. There's the way lower, revisits to the hospital, less ERs, much better time to recover. So the results are there. We just got to get that consistency, because there are so many different models, and we've got to get the payers to pull this in as well. And it's really the whole ecosystem, right? That everybody has something in it. And I love John's 4 Ps too, is that it's all those, the big 4 Ps, like how do you connect everybody in so that the value proposition is there, and then the adoption and the ease of use is there. But I think, I think we look 2 to 5, maybe even 2 years out from now, I think we'll be way ahead of where we are. We just have to get some of these process related things, payer related things, get those proof points through. And I think that it will be, much easier, because everybody's different. And like you said, like people like smartphones, like we, I think about my kids, they grew up on it. But there is a lot of community that does not, they can have the basic level of the technology, but you bring them in and you set them up with a iPad and everything to connect in. It's scary. It's scary because they haven't gone to that level of technology, and how do we help them? And that's what tying it back to the human connection.
Yeah, that patient engagement problem is a big one, but you guys are very well positioned for that.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be essential. My wife is an RN. She works in a Coumadin clinic, and they're pushing in the at-home INR technology. And these are aged patients, many of them, most of them, and somewhat technology phobic or adverse. But when you take the time, you engage, you train, and keep at it, everybody begins to love it, and it makes the Coumadin clinic's life a lot easier. It's better information flowing, faster reaction times to decisions, and these types of things. I'm still fascinated by Best Buy Health and how you're going to leverage the patient engagement through consumer engagement. And I don't know if you have other thoughts that you would put onto that.
Well, I think one of the things I'll speak in her, but I think what Best Buy Health is such a great example of is thinking differently. One of the things we don't do a good job of in healthcare is changing. We're stodgy people that take 17 years to adopt new technology, despite the fact that the data is there, because I was trained this way, I'm doing fine this way, and I don't need to change. That's kind of the mantra in healthcare. We literally have to be shoved into the future sometimes. And if you think of Best Buy, you're not thinking of the Mayo Clinic when you think of Best Buy, but they have an infrastructure that's uniquely set up that actually, if you put that into place and thought differently, wow, that's a pretty effective tool, because access is a huge issue. We don't have enough doctors, we don't have enough nurses, we don't have enough time. People wait in offices. If we can bring it to them and there's an infrastructure to deliver it, well, let's marry what we know in healthcare to what they know in delivering a service, and you got something that's really interesting. I agree with you. I'm intrigued as heck by it and looking forward to see where they go with this. And I think we all have to be challenged in healthcare to think differently. We can't apply new technology to the old way of doing things. We have to apply new technology to new way of doing things to really take advantage of where we want to go.
Yeah, nice. There was the COVID pandemic was awful in so many ways, but as a driver of change, it's been very effective. And I think it's going to have resonant effects for decades to come. So there's some silver lining to it. Let's see. So, it is interesting to have this mix of folks on the call. As I'd mentioned in the opening remarks, we have to take this holistic approach to healthcare innovation, right? And Fonta, I was wondering, how have you seen organizations across industries, across regulatory bodies, across payers, all these kinds of things, how are they interacting? And what is working? What needs greater attention?
Well, first, I think we just need to sort of identify and emphasize the fact that value really means something different to each stakeholder. So each stakeholder must be present in just determining what a value assessment framework looks like. And that's where we've been seeing the most sort of interaction just to ensure that value is something that's really mutually beneficial and that risk is shared. So for example, like patients may view value as convenience or customer service or quality, while providers are viewing value as like cost effectiveness, ease of care integration, or patient satisfaction, for example. But then we are also seeing for some of these assessment frameworks that health plans may only look at value as something that's cost effective and really looking at something that's from a safety and efficacy side, but not really looking at the whole care journey. So it's really pivotal that all of these groups are working together so that each viewpoint is really understood and that there's like essential collaboration and just partnership in between them. And what I've been loving a lot about just like some of the research interviews that we've done recently is just how focused our members are at really looking at like integration and really looking at a patient's whole care journey in a very like holistic way. So this really means like enabling tech, looking at different clinical workflows and how we can evolutionize them. And some of the traditional barriers to this are really just like the lack of clinical evidence or having difficulty with integration throughout different health systems, especially if there's a lot of like patient portability, like how are we keeping track of patients, especially when there's increased access to care and there's like different site of care shifts, like how are we making sure that all of our patients aren't lost to follow-up? And that's really where like integration comes in. And pharma also has a huge role to play in this just because like they can really see the full picture of where patients are going, where they're being seen, what they're being prescribed, etc. And so to just alleviate some of these issues, we've seen for some of the newer innovations that, let's say like academic medical centers and providers, they're really being a prime proponent of virtual and decentralized clinical trials. We're seeing now that the idea of a key opinion leader is changing a lot, and that this is really becoming more broad so that we're incorporating digital opinion leaders. We're looking at other healthcare providers. We're really looking at that like democratization of knowledge throughout each sector. And then also, we've also just like spoken to members that really emphasize technology and want to embed it into clinicians' workflow. So they'll train clinicians up front in an attempt to just sort of like standardize identification, to standardize diagnoses, to standardize subsequent treatment. So vendors are now like offering integration into EHRs and providing clinician decision support, like through Epic or through other EHR platforms, so that patients who meet criteria are all being defined correctly, the systems are being accurately triggered, and then screening can begin. So we're just seeing a lot of collaboration and partnership throughout all of these sectors. And that really is like the key to making sure that a shared sense of value is really accomplished here.
Yeah, interesting. Jean, does that square with the kind of barriers that you've seen or had to break through in order to deliver the services you're talking about?
Well, I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing now is, going back to what problem you're trying to solve. I think letting the providers and the physicians do their role, which is to provide the quality care that they have the knowledge in the disease itself, and take it what was happening when everybody started, remote patient monitoring, is that how do you set up the device is something they would always go back to the nurses or the physicians, and that's not their role in this, right? This is where Best Buy is coming in to say, okay, let's take out the tech implications out. Let's provide that level of service and that level of care, and then let the physicians. Now everybody's doing a little different. Sometimes we have the command control systems, and some of our customers in our hospital systems have their own, and that we're working back and forth on that. But I think at the end of the day, really, if you keep the patient in focus and solve their problem, because these problems are all different, right? It's different if you're at home with your spouse versus you no longer have your spouse, right? Which takes a sense of security away. I don't think you see that, you don't understand that till you kind of go through it, but when it's just someone, and then you have other factors too, like, loneliness and isolation that impact your overall health. And how do we, build in, we're looking at products that building in natural language processing that can, help us. Not only is this person have health issues, but they also have loneliness and depression that's also impacting their daily life. So I think it's very complex, but I think if we can just take the almost step away and try to take the complexity out and, use things such as like Butterfly. I mean, you think about it, if you have a hospital at home patient or chronically ill patient that you can have like within the servicing, you bring in a practitioner that can also do diagnostics with ultrasound technology that's right there. That's really beneficial than trying to get the patient out, get them scheduled, right? How can you even get scheduled right now for to have an ultrasound? You've got real time on the time decision, and that's the faster you can see a problem, like John's finding his own cancer. I mean, how amazing is that, to just not want everybody to have the Butterfly product. I know we had tried to do something like this at Philips, and it was a little bit clunkier. It was not adopted as well because it wasn't like a single solution. You had to have the iPad and everything else. But yeah, I think it is complex, but at some point I think we have to put the patient at the center and try to take away the complexity and get the adoption and get the data, and the data can help us solve some of the other problems that are going to be within the system.
Yeah, no, I like the idea of breaking down complexity and building up solutions. That's something we do at Triple Ring every day. But I might run counter to this, and maybe I'll aim this at John. I mean, EMR, talk about complexity. So comment on that, if you could, please.
Well,
how do you interface? Yeah.
I think I'll share the same frustration all physicians do. And the promise of EHR was great. The unintended consequences was it took me away from my patient. And healthcare is a very human thing. People that go into healthcare because they care deeply about people, and it's a human connection. And if you think about the vulnerability people present themselves with, they want one of three things. They want you to either keep me healthy, what's wrong with me, help me get better. And that EHR can be an incredibly powerful tool, but if that's all I'm looking at and that's all I'm engaging with, I've kind of lost the human part of healthcare. And it's so important to have that kind of connection. And so I think we can learn some lessons from the EHR. So how do you deploy new technology broadly fast? Obviously, we all know that without the federal government mandating it, it never would have happened that quickly. But if we come upon great solutions that all of us here are talking about that really work, how do we leverage the fast learning and adoption so it doesn't take 17 years? And there's some things we could have learned from the deployment of that can help. There are things the federal government or payers can help us in. If we really prove, let's say for an example, that the use of lung ultrasound in the home reduces ED visits and hospitalizations, how do we use the power of government and payers to say, no, do it this way because it's better, and force us to adjust our healthcare systems to do that? I think that's where the lessons of EHR are. I think the other thing that we speak to is there's data that lives inside of that we can leverage if we use it effectively to be more proactive in the way in which we manage patients, to catch them, to find the compliance issues, to find those people that are falling off that so desperately need our help. And I think getting the better side of EHR out of it is something I really look forward to and I have great hope for. And I want to leverage the lessons I learned going through both an Epic and a Cerner deployment, both of which were monumental shifts in my life of practicing physician.
I don't think anyone has anything nice to say about Epic or Cerner. In my world, prior to health, it's SAP or Oracle. I mean, all these systems, they've added so much complexity that you lose the value because they take away from people's doing their being able to do their work.
One of the really cool things about Butterfly is as I'm ultrasounding my patient with the screen right in my hand, I show them that there's this connection from the probe to me, to the pathology real time. And that is so empowering for the patient themselves to understand the disease at stake, motivating for them and reassuring all at the same time, and incredibly powerful for kids because they're not intimidated by that phone that it's plugged into. But when that big old machine comes rolling in, they're ready to run for the hills. And so it's a transformational way in which to practice medicine.
Yeah, nice. Well, time flies, and I promised that we'd have a good 10 minutes for Q&A. There are a couple of questions, and Nicole, I know I was going to ask you to do it, but I guess I can see what the questions are, so maybe I'll just run with it, and I'll just leave this open to the panel. So one of the questions from the audience is, as affordability of innovative technology decreases, accessibility increases, and patients begin to utilize at-home care. Do you foresee a reduction in the quantity of staff at traditional hospitals? Maybe Fonta, you could start, or somebody jump in.
Sure. So as I think we've all been saying, I think the most pivotal and important part of this all is the human connection. And I feel like that would be lost if we saw a decrease or a reduction in the quantity of staff at hospitals. We already know that staff burnout is a huge issue right now. And it's the reason why there's so much turnover. There's not a lot of retention in staffing and in the workforce in general. So I personally do not foresee a reduction in the quantity of staff at traditional sort of settings at all. Also, we know that with some of these newer technologies that we do need humans to sort of relay the data back to make sure that the data is still reliable. So there still will always be a human proponent to it that is necessary for the success of these technologies and the uptake of them.
Yeah, and Jean, do you imagine that Best Buy Health will have RNs and physicians on the Geek Squad?
Oh, we do. We do.
Okay.
So our command control, not necessarily our Geek Squad in the setup. I think if you could go to hospital at home, you may be able to leverage, RNs. The hospitals have been doing that on their own, but we do have our command control centers that we have. They're not that big right now. I think we have about 20 nurses who are certified in every state. And they have a whole dashboard on the point of care and their serviceability and the time that they spend with patients, and the end results are coming out really great. And I don't think this is about reducing staff or needing less physicians or nurses. It's about enabling people to do what they do best, and that is to take care of their patients and to spend time with their patients and take away the stress of no hospital beds. I mean time and time again you hear people waiting in the ER for a couple days to get a bed. I mean my daughter was in the hospital for another, she ended up in the ICU, and she was stuck there for 8 days because she couldn't get a bed somewhere else. I mean, that's just waste, right? That's waste in the system. So I think we will become smarter and leaner and eliminate the waste and let our healthcare practitioners, who we probably need more of, really be able to do their job and love their job and not be totally exhausted and stressed out to the point that they go to do other things.
Yeah,
And I
John,
think digital health will provide opportunities too for to be able to do the telemedicine, do these other things that will provide the other opportunities for people who want to do different career paths.
Yeah, no, very interesting. John, I mean, as a practicing physician, how do you see the technology, augmenting or replacing people in clinical settings?
I could not embrace more new technology because it allowed me to be a person at the bedside. I'm still waiting for the first person in healthcare that says I don't have enough to do, because I haven't found one yet. And so if technology can enable me to be more efficient in what I do, to be less harried and stressed, to be more thoughtful and proactive in the way I stuff, as opposed to how do I get everything done, then what technology will do will make healthcare better. I don't see us reducing. In fact, I might suggest it takes us the other direction, because I think new technology offers the promise of making affordable healthcare more affordable, more efficient, and less wasteful, where we could invest in more people, because we do need more people to do things. You wait in the emergency room to see physicians, you wait for the nurses to come. Nursing ratios are getting bigger and bigger. I think we need more people. And if we can make our devices and our care much more efficient, we can afford more people. And so I see it actually going the other way. And I actually see people staying in longer because they're going to love more of what they do, as opposed to being burned out more from what they do.
Another question from the audience is that, given that fewer than 40% of US adults have a bachelor's degree, and many have less education than that, how are we engineering our products to make them usable for less sophisticated patients? And I think I would add to this, if we can get Jean to comment, what would Best Buy Health demand in a feature set or in a user interface on a product that's going into health at home? So I open it to all three of you guys to kind of answer that one. How are we engineering our products, and what do those products have to look like?
Well, for Best Buy Health, we're trying to integrate as many products as we can into our platform. So you take the user interface away. Now, of course, that takes time, and there's such a diverse amount of products right now. But we're also working with hospitals to have, this is my recommended set. These are my 3 devices. So you take away the need to be able to do it yourself, but it is about the user interface, and it's relatively simple. And there's wearables. You start with the wearable, right? I mean, we have a band, but we're also working a watch. And then with the watch, can you have fall detection? The watch will, will monitor a lot that automatically goes into the platform. And then I think that, technology is everywhere, and you have to also within the patient, enable it by what we can do with Geek Squad, but also enable it with caregivers, with, grandchildren, whoever can help the people that may not have that access. And, the technology is there because you don't need to have Wi-Fi. These are data enabled monitors that can easily be self-installed, because half the time, the problem is connecting to the Wi-Fi. People just don't know how to do a lot of that stuff, or they forget their passwords. We all know what that's like. And so I think just keeping it as simple and being ahead of the game. And I think that will really, enable health equity, because a lot of people don't have this access, and we need to find a way to get them the access that they can get quality care that is affordable and sustainable for all. I mean, we spend so much money in the United States on care, and we don't get the value to all the people who really need it.
I think one of the advantages Butterfly's had is because we have unable to deliver this device across the globe. I mean, we put 1,000 devices with the Gates Foundation into sub-Saharan Africa, to places that have never had technology before, which serves as a great test of how do you build it simple and easy enough for people to use it. And so we continue to develop our products so that, and that is through the work of human factors studies that we do in the beginning, that everybody can use. And I personally kind of use the remote principle. If it's easier to use than the remote at home on my TV, I think we're there. And I think most of our devices have really, most of the work that we've done with our device has really proven that to be the case. We're the only medical device to win an Apple Design Award, and it really was based on the fact that we made it incredibly simple. I literally, when I do demos for my folks, I hand them the device and say, figure it out. I actually don't even tell them. And most of the time they actually can. It's that simple. And you have to have that mindset. Because remember, people that are sick are anxious to begin with. They don't need the stress of how do I figure out how to use this device? Because the biggest problem for payers is compliance. I mean, we've got a wonderfully simple device at home that's really helpful for the management of heart failure. It's called a scale that has a pretty simple user guide. Get on it, yet people don't use it. And so you have to think about these kinds of technologies that way, and make it simpler than opening a childproof cap on a pillbox when you have a bad headache. They got to be easy. And I think if you start with your design that way, you get much better compliance. I think the other thing is people actually kind of like new technology. If it's simple, easy to use, and they get positive reinforcement from it, they'll use it more. It's the downside of the scale, because the scale tends to give you negative reinforcement. Nobody likes to get on it and look at a big number, so I'm not going to get on it. I can pretend I haven't lost weight.
Yeah, nice. It goes to Fonta's comment about the value frameworks and this type of thing. So Fonta, do you speak to patient advocacy groups or patients themselves in your research and that sort of thing? How do you learn or know what's required for them to adopt these technologies?
Unfortunately, we don't speak directly to patients. Most of what we learn through like consumerism and stuff is basically what we learn through our member interviews. So sometimes that will be with patient advocacy groups, but most of the time it's through interviews with like service line leaders and people who are involved in like community engagement.
Yeah, nice. Okay, let's see, maybe one more question and then we'll wrap up. How about this one? A question about human factors and usability. Rewind a decade and usability may not have been mentioned. Will you be doing FDA submissions And if so, what human factors regulatory expertise does Best Buy Health have on staff? I think, yeah, Jean, I think this one's directed to you.
Yeah, so we have a large customer office within Best Buy, which has human factors, which has user experience, user design factors. We also do a lot of design thinking in our whole processes. We have a whole 5D design, discover, design, develop process. So we do follow pretty standards in our overall experience. And I do think it's like just what like John said, you got to make it as easy as or easier than the remote, right? I remember my parents first got their iPhones. My daughter was so upset because she's like, they don't even know how to use the clicker. How are they going to use an iPhone? But it's just that kind of like that thought process and bringing it in. So yeah, we do have those team members on staff, and because of the whole consumer experience with Best Buy, there is a very high level of expertise.
Okay, and then maybe real quick, because we only have a few minutes left, and I'll start with you, Fonta. What excites you about the future? What progress have you seen from your perch as you study these problems in these spaces?
Yeah, I think personally, I'm just very excited about just precision medicine, such as like pharmacogenomics and just personalized healthcare in general. I think it's amazing that with like precision medicine, you can have much smaller clinical trials, which are just more efficient. I feel like, in my opinion, we just have a lot of treatments out there today that just have very like marginal efficacy, but they're being applied very widely. So we really need to like develop things that are really more just likely to succeed in like a smaller swath of people. And that really just like ties into how do we define value for like individuals versus like whole populations. Like we've seen the partnership with like Epic and Cerner, which I know that some people aren't a fan of, and how they have 2 new partnerships to really make like genetic testing, for example, really accessible. So embedding that interface into your EHR, making sure that this new interface really clinicians can order genetic testing within a click and patients get the results like very easy. I feel like precision medicine really is the future of healthcare, and it just shows through like the way we're looking at more of these devices as like prescriptive and very tailored to individuals.
Yeah, nice. John, what's exciting to you in the future in like 30 seconds? That's all we got.
I think healthcare is probably finally ready to change faster. I think that's probably what excites me the most. I think and I think about in our world, you think about in healthcare, there are very few innovations that have spanned the globe. With the exception of vaccines and antibiotics, almost all the new technology that we talk about here doesn't exist. 2/3 of the world has no access to medical imaging. We're going to change that. And that's going to change now, and it's happening. And that's probably what excites me the most. Health equity is actually going to be something that's actually not just a buzzword that people talk about, but something that could actually be a reality. And I think that's part of what Butterfly is all about and what everybody here is talking about, because that is definitely what's needed in this world.
Great. Yeah. All right. And maybe, Nicole, I guess I should, we only have a minute left, but so we'll give John the last word. But so thank you, all 3 of you, for joining us today. And thanks, Nicole, for putting this on. It was fascinating. I really enjoyed it personally, and I hope the audience did as well. So Nicole, I guess I hand it back to you.
All right. Thank you so much. I agree. It was a really amazing conversation. Thanks, Ryan, for moderating it. Thank you to Dr. Martin, Jean Marie, and Fonta for joining us for this conversation. Thank you to Triple Ring as the sponsor for this webinar. It's a great educational opportunity for our members. And just know we can't pull together these types of opportunities without your sponsorship and support. So please think about that as an opportunity for the future. I encourage you to go to massmedic.com and look at upcoming events. We have lots of in-person and virtual opportunities, and this will be recorded. So everyone who registered will get this after the session. So again, thank you so much and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.